Read simply, it is an ugly little soap opera, a story about murder, deception, brute force, sex, and bloodlust. Its plot lines and characterizations are so crude as to call into serious question how this book became and remained a sacred canonical text for 2,000 years and more. Such is the great midrashist Rabbi Burton Vysotsky's scathing assessment of the book we began this morning, Genesis, or in Hebrew, Bereshit. So how then did Genesis make the biblical cut? Perhaps, Rabbi Vysotsky concludes, because its narratives, with all their brutal power, and its characters, with all their flaws, teach us something about the construction of our own moral behavior. The Genesis of Ethics. That's the title of Rabbi Vysotsky's wonderful book, and also my theme this morning. For the early stories of this first book of Torah not only recall the earliest memories and myths of our people's identity, they also recount how our biblical forebears learned moral accountability. And in so doing, they actually describe the manner in which each of us learns it too. And I hope to demonstrate this by reading with you a few of the book's better-known tales. Let's begin with the story of Adam and Eve, the serpent and the forbidden fruit. As you'll recall, God creates Adam and then Eve and places them in the Garden of Eden, and then instructs them as follows in the first text on the handouts you received when you came in from this week's parashah. And the eternal God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will die." Now the serpent was the shrewdest of the wild animals the eternal God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it, or you will die." The serpent said to the woman, "You will not die. Rather, God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of it and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. We know what happens next. God calls them to account for disobeying and expels them from paradise, which leaves us wondering, why would God forbid these first human beings from acquiring the knowledge of good and evil? Wouldn't God want them to learn just that? And according to some rabbinic readings of the story, that was precisely what God wanted them to learn, which is why God created the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and placed it right there in the middle of the garden. But with all the other fruit trees around it, Adam and Eve never found it. And so in order to lure them to it, God tempted them. Much as a parent might say to a child, "See that jar of cookies on the table? Don't eat any of them." And know full well that as soon as he or she was out of sight, that is precisely what the child will do. So God believed that by tempting Adam and Eve, saying, "Don't eat from that tree," that they would eat from it and acquire wisdom. And in case the temptation weren't strong enough, the serpent would utz them along. So if they only did what God wanted them to do from the outset, eat the fruit and gain the wisdom, why did God punish them, expelling them from the Garden of Eden? Because, the rabbis answer, the knowledge of right and wrong is meaningless in paradise where no difficult choices are made. And because God never intended them to remain there, any more than children are meant to remain in childhood eternal. The purpose of these first humans was to go out into the world, to till and tend it, and nurture its future builders and caretakers. Their reward would be the fulfillment one finds in the joys and trials of life outside the garden of childhood, which is our reward too. But first, they had to learn right from wrong. The second story I would turn to is that of Adam's and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel, also from this week's portion on your sheets. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Eternal, I have brought forth a man." Then she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Eternal. And Abel too brought an offering, choice portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Eternal looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Eternal said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you can subdue it." Cain is furious because though he was the one who recognized God as the source of the earth's bounty and was the first to bring an offering of thanksgiving, Abel's is accepted and his is not. God recognizes Cain's predicament, that if Cain doesn't gain control of his rage, tragedy may ensue. So God reminds him that while the urge to lash out in anger is always present, he can master it, and therefore he must master it. Jewish tradition, in fact, teaches that the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Hatov, the evil inclination and the good inclination, are constantly at war inside us. That the evil inclination, the drive toward vengeance and lust and power, is strong, but that the good inclination is stronger. Therefore, no matter how angry we may feel, we have no excuse for acting on that anger. We are accountable for our behavior. Again, another early lesson children must acquire. Cain, though, does not control his rage and murders his brother. Then, when God confronts Cain asking, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain responds, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And so the other critical lesson we learn from this sad episode: we are indeed our brother's keepers. As children mature, they also come to recognize that their responsibility extends beyond their own needs, desires, and well-being to those others in the world around them. That lesson is amplified in the next significant biblical tale. The story of Noah is perhaps the most familiar of all Bible stories, so I won't review it in detail. But while the Bible tells us that God chose Noah to survive the flood and create humanity 2.0 because he was righteous, the rabbis don't completely concur. If he were truly righteous, they argue, he would have tried to save his fellow human beings. And so this next powerful legend, follow with me. After the flood, Noah opened up the ark and looked out. He saw the earth desolate, forests and gardens uprooted, corpses visible everywhere. There was no grass, no vegetation. The world was a wasteland. In pain and dismay, Noah cried out to God, "Sovereign of all creation, in 6 days you made the earth and all that grows in it. It was like a garden, a table prepared for a feast. Now you yourself have brought the work of your hands to naught, uprooting all that you have planted, tearing down all that you built. Why did you not show compassion for your creatures?" And God replied, "O faithless shepherd, now, after the destruction, you come to me and complain. But when I said to you, 'Make an ark for yourself, for I'm going to flood the earth to destroy all flesh,' you did not plead for your neighbors. How differently Abraham will act. He will pray on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Moses, when his people anger me with their calf of gold, will offer his life for them. But you, when you saw that judgment was about to strike the world, you thought only of yourself and your household, while all else perished." Thus far, we've learned through the Bible's early tales and our tradition's response to them that we are expected to live our lives according to a code of right and wrong, that we're accountable for whether we live up to that code, and that our moral responsibility extends, as this midrash insists, beyond our own personal well-being. But an important question remains. Is there one moral code for all of humanity, or are ethics relative? One last rabbinic legend about Abraham, whose family narratives occupy most of the book of Genesis, answers that question. The story goes like this. Hidden as a child in a cave by his father to protect him from the wicked king Nimrod, Abraham emerges at the age of 3. Follow along. When Abraham was 3 years old, he went out of the cave and, observing the world, wondered in his heart, "Who created heaven and earth and me?" All that day he prayed to the sun. In the evening, the sun set in the west and the moon rose in the east. Upon seeing the moon and stars around it, he said, "This one must have created heaven and earth and me. These stars must be the moon's princes and courtiers." So all night long he stood in prayer to the moon. In the morning, the moon sank in the west and the sun rose in the east. Then he said, "There is no might in either of these. There must be a higher God over them. To that God will I pray." Abraham's intuition is more than a testament to one God ruling all creation. It represents an innovation in moral thought. Idolatry and polytheism restrict a God's power and influence to a single element of creation, such as the sun or the moon, or to a single function, such as fertility. Localizing God's presence in one aspect of the world negates God's authority over the rest of the world, and therefore denies transcendent ethics. Only a God that stands outside of creation can command a set of laws by which all of creation is bound. The denial of other gods in favor of one God who commanded the world into existence renders Judaism's ethical teachings universal. This philosophy we call ethical monotheism represents Judaism's great theological contribution. There is no room for moral relativism in Jewish thought. So in conclusion, while these earliest stories of the creation of the world and of our people may reside more within the realm of sacred myth than factual history, they hold and convey significant ethical truths. Though many of their characters are morally flawed, those very flaws open up opportunities for moral growth, theirs and ours. And they remind us that we don't have to be perfect to make a profound difference in the world, which is good, because none of us is perfect. Though, Lewis, you came mighty close today. Rather, what we must do is be true to ourselves and hold fast to our ideals, the values of human decency, and of our responsibility to tikkun olam, healing the broken places of our world, ideals which you, Lewis, have embraced as your own. It is not always easy to hold on to our ideals, our sense of right and wrong. The messages with which our society entices us are not always good ones. It can be a challenge to recognize that everybody else's path may not be the right path or the right one for us. But Lewis, if you continue to embrace this beautiful tradition, whose transmission we celebrate today, then you will always have a roadmap. And if you remain involved in the life of your temple community, then you will never travel that road alone, for we will be beside you, as we are today, rejoicing with you. Today, God has called you, as God called Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham before you. And you have responded so beautifully and in a fashion true to who you are. And we are so proud of you. And in celebration, we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who keeps us in life, sustains us, and has enabled us to reach this joyous day. Amen.